Hi everyone. We're going to pick up here with Animals Part 2, starting with phylum Arthropoda. Now, if you'll recall, when we were talking about a phylum, we were talking about domain Eukarya, which are all the eukaryotic cells, then kingdom Animalia, and now phylum Arthropoda. So when you think about phylum Arthropoda, these are all of those things that are going to have segmented bodies and typically a shell. They have an exoskeleton that is made of a non-living substance called chitin. This exoskeleton made of chitin, it's not like your nails or your hair. This substance is non-living. Okay, chitin is a polysaccharide, which means that it is a type of sugar, really. So this chitin is non-living material. So the only way that arthropods can grow is to secrete a new shell that's soft up underneath the old one, split the old one apart, and when they first come out, this is called molting. When they first come out, they are soft-bodied, and that chitinous shell hasn't hardened yet. And then they expand their bodies and stretch that chitinous shell, and then they let it harden, and so now they have a new, larger shell. We as humans make use of this from time to time. If you've ever heard of people eating soft shell crab, well, soft shell crab, it's not a special kind of crab. It's just blue crab, Calonectus apidus. Same regular old blue crab. It's just their freshly molted blue crab. And you can actually eat the outer shell. The outer shell is, it's not hard yet and it's digestible. So it's, you can eat that. So it's soft shell crab. When you step on an animal like an insect or something like that and it crunches, what you're stepping on, actually the crunch is that chitinous exoskeleton. So what are the things that we find in phylum Arthropoda? Okay, these are all of our hard jointed exoskeleton animals that are they're bilaterally symmetric, which we've talked about before. All of their joints are paired. They have paired joints. Depending on the type of arthropod, it may have 10 or more pairs of legs, or it may have only 3 pairs of legs, or a total of 6, or it may have 4 pairs of legs for a total of 8, depending on what it is. Your crustaceans like lobster, crab, crayfish, they will have a lot of sets of legs, plus swimmerets and chelipeds and things like that. Spiders and spider-related organisms, organisms related to spiders, have 8 pairs of legs, and insects have not 8 pairs of legs, but a total of 8 legs. And insects have a total of 6 legs. If it's got more than 6 legs, it's not an insect. Most arthropods have a head, a thorax, and an abdomen, but only insects have these separated into 3 separate things. Lobsters, crab, the crustaceans, and also all of the spider and spider-related organisms. The head and the thorax are actually fused together to make something called a cephalothorax, and then you have the abdomen. And then you have other things like centipedes and millipedes that are just completely segmented all the way down their bodies. Again, I've given you information here for you to, if you check out the non-recorded slide deck, you will be able to see this link and come up with more information as well as images. And then here are several images of arthropods right here. The ones that you probably are unfamiliar with, these guys right here, these are called barnacles. They are a type of crustacean. This is a horseshoe crab, which is not a crab and it's not a spider, but it's more closely related to spiders than it is to crabs. And it has not changed at all in millions of years. We have a centipede here, and then here's a millipede. Most people have a hard time distinguishing between these two. Centipedes are carnivorous. Some of them are even venomous. Millipedes are not venomous and they eat detritus, which means that they're vegetarian. Centipedes have 1 pair of legs. They don't actually have 100 legs. They have 1 pair of legs for each body segment. Millipedes, on the other hand, have 2 pairs of legs for every body segment. Much more rounded bodies. This one in the bottom left-hand corner is called a trilobite. It is an extinct arthropod. Now, that completes all of our invertebrated phyla. Okay, now there are other minor phyla of invertebrates, and you can kind of check those out. But chances are the things that you will come across, that you will see that are invertebrate, are in one of the phyla of invertebrates that I've talked about here. Vertebrates. Vertebrates are only found in one phylum. This is phylum Chordata. And there are several characteristics that make something a chordate. You are a chordate. There are several characteristics that make something a chordate that we can talk about here. They have something called a notochord. This is what gives our phylum its name, phylum Chordata. Notochord is a stiffened rod of tissue running down the back. We say that that is dorsal. So it runs dorsally down the animal. So this rod of stiffened tissue ultimately gives rise not to your nerve cord, but to the vertebral column itself. So the notochord is what gives rise to the vertebral column. Now, another characteristic of all chordates is the fact that we do have a dorsal nerve cord, which is interesting. That's your nerve cord. It goes down the back of it goes down right down the middle of your vertebral column. Invertebrates tend to have their primary nerve cord on the ventral side, which is the front. So if you were to dissect, say, an earthworm, you would find that its primary nerve cord goes down the ventral or the front side, not the dorsal side. Chordates have an internal skeleton where our muscles attach. We are bilaterally symmetric. We have, two eyes, two ears, two arms, etc. We have a mirror image on right and left. Some may lay eggs, some give birth to live young, some have internal fertilization, some have external fertilization, and we'll walk through some of those things here in just a minute. So we're going to take a look at the major classes of phylum Vertebrata, or phylum, well, actually this is subphylum Vertebrata within phylum Chordata. Chondrichthyes. Now these are our sharks, rays, skates, the fish that have a cartilaginous skeleton. In other words, they don't have true bone. Their whole skeleton is made of cartilage. They are poikilothermic. Actually, we're going to modify that just a little bit and say they are ectothermic. Many of them are poikilothermic. Now, what's the difference? Poikilothermic means that their body temperature changes. That they're simply going to be whatever the temperature is outside their body. Ectothermic means the same thing, but typically ectotherms will control their body temperature to be higher or lower by moving from one place to another. Say, for instance, reptiles. Reptiles have to maintain a certain body temperature, but they can't do it within, by their own means, internally like we do. We are homeothermic. They have to move from an area that's hot to an area that's cold and back and forth in order to maintain a relatively constant body temperature. Things that are truly poikilothermic, as the term is here on the screen, they don't do anything to maintain a constant body temperature. Their body temperature simply is whatever the temperature is outside their body, and they're fine with that. And I don't like the term cold-blooded here, so that's one of those things. I put it here, we got it here, so that, because it's something that I'm sure that you've probably heard in your elementary classes and things like that. But cold-blooded is an outdated term because they may be very warm-blooded. In fact, it's just that they have to maintain things from outside their body. So let's take a look at what these chondrichthyes are. Now, I bring that up actually for this because there are several species of shark that literally maintain a body temperature that is much higher than the temperature that's around them by using the heat that is generated with their muscles. And this is an adaptation that they have in order to be better hunters. So here we have sharks, rays, skates, all of those things that have a cartilaginous skeleton. Now the other group of fish called osteichthyes, these are the ones that you're probably most familiar with. These are fish that have a bony skeleton. They have a true bony skeleton, calcified bone. These are all of the other types of fish, bass, mullet, lionfish, all of that. They too they too are exothermic, meaning that their body temperature is controlled by what's going on outside their body. And most fish, with there are a few exceptions, like tuna would be one because they're extremely fast-moving fish that are also hunters. They're predaceous, are not necessarily poikilothermic, but they are ectothermic. They have to move to a different place in order to maintain body heat. Here are some examples, some of the ones that you may not be familiar with. This is a sea dragon, which is a seahorse, and yes, that is indeed a fish. It is an osteichthyan fish in the family Cygnathidae. So that is definitely a fish. But some of the others, all the others that are here, you're probably familiar with. Amphibians. Now, as we move from fish to amphibian, we're kind of working our way up the chain here. Most fish, now let's think about as we go from fish to amphibians, most fish will lay eggs. Now there are some sharks, actually, sharks and rays that will give birth, somewhat live birth, but most fish will lay eggs. They lay eggs and the eggs hatch. Fish that are cartilaginous fish have internal fertilization, meaning the eggs are fertilized inside the female's body. Most of your osteichthyan fish have external fertilization. That is, females will lay eggs and the male will come along after the female has laid the eggs and will fertilize the eggs outside. So they have external fertilization. Amphibians have external fertilization and they lay eggs. There are no amphibians that don't lay eggs. These are salamanders, frogs, toads, newts, those sorts of things. The name itself, amphibia, means two lives because they are literally hatched from their egg as a fish. With gills, they breathe with gills in their earliest forms of life, and there are some amphibians that breathe with gills on and off throughout their entire lives, some their entire life, like axolotls. But for the most part, amphibians breathe with gills after they hatch, and then as they metamorphose into adults, they breathe with lungs. And so they make this transformation. So it's almost like all of evolution wrapped up in this one class of vertebrated animal. They are truly poikilothermic. They are fine with whatever their body temperature is outside their body. They can't maintain body temperature, and they don't go to great extremes to maintain body temperature, like, say, the way that reptiles do and some fish. So let's take a look at some. So here's an axolotl up at the top left, and you can see the gills right here. And these are pretty common pets. They're not common. They're not indigenous anywhere close to where we are. But a lot of people do have them as pets. This looks like a snake, but it is not. This is a legless amphibian called a Sicilian. You can tell by its bright colors. Now, also look, they have very smooth skin. Well, this guy doesn't have smooth skin, but its skin is very porous. All of them have very porous skin. And all amphibians have to return to the water in order to lay their eggs. Their eggs do not have an amniotic fluid. They do not have a shell. They will dry out if they're left on land. And so all amphibians do have to essentially go back into the water or have some pool of water in order to lay their eggs. That takes us to reptilia. Class Reptilia, this is like another step up the ladder, I guess you could say. Snakes, lizards, alligators, turtles, and then there's a couple of others that I actually have here as a separate group, but the birds technically are reptiles as well. So snakes, lizards, alligators, turtles, and then there's a group of reptiles called tuateras, which are only found indigenously in New Zealand. But we have an amniotic egg. So we have an egg that is surrounded by an amnion or a sac. And then that is also surrounded by a shell to keep it from drying out. Even reptiles that live in the water have to return to the land in order to lay their eggs, because reptiles, unlike amphibians, never breathe with gills. Reptiles breathe their entire life from the time that they hatch until the time that they die with lungs. They never breathe with gills. Reptiles, let's change this from being poikilothermic. I should go back and change this on the slides. Let's just say that they are ectothermic because they have to maintain a body temperature, but they do that by moving from one place to another. So they're not truly poikilothermic, but they are ectothermic. They have to maintain a particular body temperature by moving from areas of warmth to areas of cold. And let's take a look at some of these. So we have chameleon, which is a type of lizard. Cobras, geckos, also a type of lizard. Iguana, another type of lizard. So we have lots of lizards here. Tortoises and turtles. All tortoises are turtles, just like frogs and toads. All toads are frogs, but not all frogs are toads. Frog is the more general term. Turtle is the more general term here. So all tortoises are actually turtles, but not all turtles are tortoises. These guys have dry skin. They do not have wet skin. And even if they live in the water, then obviously their skin is going to be wet. But their skin is not porous like amphibian skin. Their skin is like a built-in raincoat. This keeps them from drying out. This is a huge evolutionary advantage for reptiles because it means that they don't have to stay close to the water. They can live anywhere. So those are reptiles. Now, aves, which are birds. Now, I said just a minute ago that aves are actually reptiles. There's a big movement right now to get aves classified as a subclass under reptilia because of the fact that essentially aves are modern dinosaurs. We still have dinosaurs today. We just call them birds. So, and this would be a group, they're descended directly from a group of reptiles called the archosaurs, which is the group that gave rise to the dinosaurs and whatnot like that. So they were probably at least lukewarm-blooded, the dinosaurs were. And birds do maintain an internal body temperature. They are homeothermic. And so they maintain body temperature within. They don't have to move from one place to another to maintain any type of body temperature. And that's one reason why those scales that were on reptiles, we see them as modified scales, feathers, in birds. It's a way to insulate them. It's a way to insulate them. So you have all sorts of birds. Some birds can fly, some birds can't fly. One thing that I think about often when it comes to flightless birds is that the nation of New Zealand with their national airline, which is Kiwi Airlines, I question the logic of naming your national airline after a bird that can't fly. It doesn't make a lot of sense to me, but hey, I didn't name it. So, as you can see, you have a general idea of what birds are. Birds obviously lay eggs. They have internal fertilization like reptiles. Because their eggs have shells like reptiles, the eggs have to be fertilized while they are still inside the female's body. Now that's different from the amphibians. Note the difference as we migrate up the chain here. Finally, class Mammalia. This would include us. Mammals produce milk from mammary glands. Mammal offspring drink milk. This is where we get the name Mammalia. Mammals have hair. Mammals give live birth with a few exceptions. There actually are three subgroups of mammals. The egg layers, which there are only two groups of, the prototherians, which would be the duckbill platypus and the spiny echidna. Then you have the marsupials, which give birth very soon, and the offspring are not nourished with umbilical cords and whatnot like that, and the offspring are born very prematurely and they go into the mother's pouch. This would be most of the mammals that you find indigenous to Australia, and then also the group of mammals here in the US, the opossum, which is the only marsupial mammal that's indigenous anywhere outside of Australia. Mammals are homeothermic. We maintain a body temperature within. We don't have to move from place to place. We don't have to move from place to place in order to maintain a body temperature. So here are several examples, and like with everything else, I've given you a link to more information and more images. So here's an image of everything that's a mammal. So I've given you images here that include the marsupials, as well as placental mammals like us, and then the egg-laying mammals here, which is listed as monotreme, which is a very old name for this group, but they are called prototherians, the egg-laying mammals. So, sexual reproduction versus asexual reproduction. Most animals will go through sexual reproduction, although there are some that can do asexual reproduction. So what is the difference? Asexual reproduction is when you only have the genetic material from one parent. You have genetic material from one parent, and so the offspring are genetically identical to the parent. This happens by typically budding. Part of it breaks off. Think back to the last lecture with sponges. Sponges can break apart, and each part can grow into a new sponge, but they are genetically identical to each other when that happens. So they're producing exact copies of the parent. Sexual reproduction, on the other hand, requires genetics from two different individuals. Now, as I stated in the other lecture, that the two individuals do not necessarily have to be one male and one female, because the two of them could have both. As in earthworms. Earthworms are hermaphroditic. All earthworms have both testes and ovaries, and so when they come together to mate, they will actually fertilize each other, and then when they separate, each one lays eggs, and the lays eggs that have been fertilized with the gametes of the other. And so you end up with new worms that are a product of the joining of the two genetic materials, which is what sexual reproduction is. But you do need to know that testes are the male gonads, and testes produce sperm, which is the male gamete. Females have ovaries, or the ovaries are female gonads, and ovaries make eggs, which are the female gamete. And we've talked about external versus internal fertilization already. So external fertilization is when the eggs are fertilized outside the female's body. Internal fertilization is when the egg is fertilized inside the female's body. So once the egg is fertilized with the sperm, it now is a complete set of genetic material. Diploid, we refer to that as, and it is called a zygote, because at this point in time, it is genetically unique. Okay, it is genetically unique. It contains a unique mix of genetic material. Then once that zygote starts to grow, it will grow through mitosis and become a ball of cells, and then something called a blastula, and then it will be encased inside of an egg, if it's something that lays an egg, and it will continue to grow and feed off of the yolk sac, and until the egg is laid, and until the egg hatches. This process creates something that is genetically unique, which means that it has a unique mix of genetic material, which gives it a serious advantage when it comes to evolution, because the more you mix up the genetic material, the more likely it is that you're going to hit a combination that's going to be an advantage for a particular organism. The more the genetics are mixed up, the more of an advantage that is for organisms. So, if we think about the life processes that animals have to go through, animals are heterotrophic, so they do have to ingest, they have to take in food in order to grow and to repair tissues. That is called digestion. All of the food that you take in, any nutrients, have to be broken down into smaller particles and then built back up into new tissues. Animals will have digestive juices that aid in this digestion, and then that digestion, whatever is broken down becomes part of that organism. Interestingly enough, the protein that is easiest for humans to assimilate is the protein of an egg. So All animals go through cellular respiration. Actually, every organism that's alive has to go through cellular respiration. One of the biggest misconceptions that I need to make sure that we all don't have. You probably in elementary school, you probably heard somebody say, plants photosynthesize and animals go through cellular respiration. Well, number one, this is just completely wrong. Yes, plants go through photosynthesis, but every living organism, whether we're talking about a bacterium or a plant or an animal or a fungus or whatever, goes through cellular respiration. Every living organism goes through cellular respiration, which is what is necessary to take it, where oxygen is used in order to break down sugars, in order to make ATP. Every living organism has to do that. Animals have to get rid of waste. Okay, animals have to get rid of waste. We create waste products. Actually, when you're breathing, when you breathe out about 5% carbon dioxide, and that is an excretory process. You're getting rid of cellular waste, which is carbon dioxide. Animals do respond to stimuli. In fact, most living things will respond to stimuli. Plants respond to stimuli. So when something responds to stimuli, that is a life process. Most animals are motile, not all of them, but they can move to find mates, find food, etc., etc. Then there are others, the ones that are sessile, all live in the ocean or in a water of some sort, but typically they are marine. And they reproduce by releasing their gametes into the water. And it's just they float along until they find the gametes of another one of the same species, and then food is filtered right out of the water. So I try not to use any absolutes here because there's no such thing as an absolute in science. So our basic needs when it comes to animals, obviously they need to have food, they need to take in nutrients, they need to have water. Obviously they have to have air. Every aerobic organism needs air. Just like all organisms will also need water, and the animals need space to live in. Okay, and then they need to have some sort of shelter to live. They need to shelter from the outside environment. So here's some websites for you to take a look at. And again, as I cycle through these, you can take a look at the non-recorded slide deck and see exactly what the things are that you're going to need to study in order to prepare for the GACE. And that concludes animals.